My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping Australians with cost of living? What approaches would leave people worse off?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker. The member for Reed's terrific, and that's a really important question. And when that side of the House is focused on long lunches and cuts and conflict and culture wars, this side of the House has maintained a focus on the cost of living. And because of that focus, inflation is down, wages are up and unemployment is low. We've delivered 2 surpluses and we're rolling out cost of living help. And we're making substantial and now sustained progress in the fight against inflation, but we know that people are still under pressure and that's why there is still more to do. Now, we also know that the same Australians would be thousands of dollars worse off today if the opposition leader had his way on the tax cuts, on wages, on energy rebates and on cost of living help. And we also know they'd be worse off still if he wins the election and goes after Medicare again, goes after wages again and pushes up electricity prices with his nuclear madness. And that's why there were 2 revelations in the last few days which were very, very important. The first one is that the long lunches policy would cost Australian workers more than $10 billion a year to subsidise long lunches and entertainment if every business claimed what they were entitled to. He wants lower wages for workers and longer lunches for bosses, and he wants taxpayers to foot the bill. Now, the second revelation is that he's got big cuts in mind, but he won't tell Australians what they are until after the election. We know that from the Insider's interview. Now, his secret cuts and his warped priorities should send a shiver up the spine of every worker, of every student, every family, every pensioner.
Treasurer will pause. The member for Moreton is warned. The manager on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Point of order's relevance. You've previously ruled that even with questions that do invite a compare and contrast, that it can't be the entire answer. And I think the Treasurer spent about 15 or 20 seconds on the first part and presumably is going to spend the balance of the question speaking about the opposition. That cannot be directly relevant to the question, even with that invitation to compare and contrast based on your previous rulings.
Order. The Leader of the House on the point of order.
Mr Speaker, there is no standing order and no section of practice that refers to dividing a question into fractions and then applying a proportion of the 3 minutes to how much on each section. This question goes specifically to what approaches would leave people worse off. There is no way the Treasurer is being anything other than relevant to that question.
Yeah. Order. Order on the point. Order. The Minister for Education is warned. The manager on a further point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance and the question does have to be directly relevant. And previous speakers, not just yourself, have ruled that in doing so, an invitation to compare and contrast is not free rein to spend the entire answer on the contrast. Now, that is the practice that has been adopted by previous speakers.
Order. 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 The Leader of the House. We'll do this orderly and we'll do it respectfully. The Leader of the House.
The compare and contrast rule, which has often been referred to as previous speakers as it's there, is when there is not a specific alternative approach as part of the question, that there's still a right to be able to compare and contrast, but it's viewed as being very restricted in those circumstances.
You're both right. Which will make me unpopular with everyone. Under the standing orders, the Treasurer is being directly relevant, but you can't have a question simply asked about the opposition. So the manager is correct. To talk about the approaches, he's got to talk about what the government is doing as well. So I'm just going to make sure for the remainder of his answer, if he is doing approaches about what would leave Australians worse, he's got to explain that in the context of the government policy as well. Order. Order. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. That's why I began by saying under this government, inflation's down, wages are up and unemployment is low. And that's been deliberate. And there is an alternative over there, Mr Speaker. And those opposite think there's $315 billion in cuts right for the picking in the budget. And Australians should know that that $350 billion includes pension indexation, natural disaster funding, hospitals and bulk billing, housing, TAFE and support for veterans. Now, they are coming after all of that, Mr Speaker, but they'll tell you about it later. They won't come clean on costs or cuts, and that puts every Australian at risk. Now, Mr Speaker, another reason why this matters and the contrast is so important is he needs to find $600 billion for this nuclear insanity. He's got to find it somewhere, and last time he went after Medicare, Mr Speaker. So a stark choice at the election this year. A coalition of cuts and conflict and culture wars, making Australians worse off and taking the country backwards, or this Prime Minister and this Labor government getting inflation down, helping with the cost of living and building Australia's future.
I didn't want to interrupt during the Treasurer, but I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
During that answer, the member for Hume made an unparliamentary remark and he should withdraw.
Just get the member for Hume to quickly withdraw.
I withdraw.
I thank the member for Hume and we'll move to the next question.